talking to the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at Tennessee State University and a professor of history at Tennessee State University, Dr. BLovett. And we're talking about the African-American population in Nashville between 1780 and 1930. Of course, Dr. BLovett, before we had our final commercial break, we promised that we would allow you to talk about some of this information that you have in reference to the antebellum, et cetera, and et cetera. Go on, let's talk about it from that perspective.
Well, the question you asked was, did the slaves and African Americans free have anything to do with the building of the large mansions and so on? And the answer is yes. As I said, most of the brick makers were African American. Many times the bricks were made and burned baked right on site to go in a home like the Hermitage or the BLmead plantation, for example. Of course, the lumber many times was developed by those particular slaves. They were the ones who laid the bricks, and there were some African Americans who were very good at building houses, and I mean they were like architects. And two that come to mind is Henry Harding, and he was in fact some kin to the William G. Harding family, which owned the BLmead plantation. But he made a fortune, and when he died in 1888, he was a very wealthy man. If you go out to the Greenwood Cemetery, you will see a large, beautiful, polished granite stone, Henry Harding, to show you that it denotes the wealth that he had in life. And of course, Moses McKissick, who came up from Pulaski, Tennessee, if you recall, for the McKissick and McKissick architect firm today, that's how he got his start as a slave architect, designing and building houses and so on. So many times when you wanted to have a house built and materials that went into the house, there were slave artisans that were involved. Two slaves in town, Jim Hill and another one called Jordan McGowan, they were the chief bandmasters during slavery times. So if they wanted to have a ball at the Hermitage or at the BLmead, they had to call Jim Hill or Jordan McGowan. They were the two most prominent bandmasters. They had their own string bands that used harp, fiddle, banjo, of course, and they made the music for these big balls and these big dances. And after slavery, both of these men became quite wealthy because they, you know, shifted their skills into a profit-making business. And Jim Hill owned the Jim Hill String Band in Nashville until he died in the 1880s.
You know, Dr. Levitt, and let's give you an opportunity over the last 3 minutes that we have to sort of summarize this book. That is, certainly it has been sold widely throughout the area and et cetera. But during this last few minutes, how could you see, how do you see this book as being used by whatever public that you think can use it, and how can it serve the general population and et cetera dealing with Nashville?
Well, I tried very hard to make the book a book that the general public could use, that could be used in college classes. It could be used for high school students as well. There's something in the book for almost everybody, and I think the chapter that I'm most proud of in this book is chapter 10, chapter 9, I'm sorry. That chapter is a chapter on the history of politics among African Americans going back to 1835. And one of the things that people today will be surprised about is that African Americans were Republicans until really about 1951.
Good. Well, explain that. We've got about 2 minutes for
Well, as you know, when African Americans were allowed to vote again after the Civil War, 1867, February, the legislature approved freedmen to have the right to cast a ballot and run for office. Well, the Republican Party was a party that had freed slaves and gotten rid of slavery, and that was Lincoln's party. And for 2 generations, almost 3 generations, African Americans remained absolutely loyal to the Republican Party. So I give incidents in the book where there were African Americans who tried to start a Democratic Party in town, and they would throw eggs at them, rotten potatoes, they would run them off the street corners and so on. They believed that to be a Democrat or anything other than Republican was absolutely disloyal to the image of Lincoln. But by 1951, as you know, we began to transcend from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party. And finally, by 1960, John F. Kennedy does get a majority, the first president to do that, gets a Democratic president, gets a majority of the African-American vote. And then Jimmy Carter gets over 90% of the African-American vote, and Clinton gets 95%. And so only in the last generation have we shifted from the Republican to the Democratic
Very
Party.
good. And Dr. Lovett, let me, over the last half minute that we have here, thank you for bringing us that excellent information in reference to the African-American population in Nashville. And as we said before, you know, we've been around to many stores and we've seen this book advertised, and we felt that we've seen it on many other shows, and we felt that we ought to at least see if we could have you to come here and to give us some information in reference to it, and to tell us why you think that this ought to be one of the books that folks can use as a source of reference. And I think that you've been able to give us that information today, and we certainly want to thank you for coming by and doing that. And we want to encourage our audience to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you and good morning.
Launch.